If there is one question that I struggle with most in my faith, it's this. Why do some people believe and others don't? Why, specifically, do some people who look at the same evidence conclude that there is a God and that Jesus is God, but other people looking at that exact same evidence conclude that there can't be a God, that all this is just random chance? Francis Collins is, as I mentioned in the previous two blogs, one of the leading scientists of our day, responsible for directing the Human Genome Project on the government side, and now the director of the National Institutes of Health. He's considered an expert in the arena of evolutionary biology. And it's his, as I explained in the previous two blogs, it's his science that led him to his faith, in large part. Looking at the science he looked at provided evidence, compelling evidence, or overwhelming evidence to him that there must be a God, and ultimately that Jesus is that God come in the flesh. Richard Dawkins is also one of today's leading scientists, one of the top experts in the field of evolutionary biology, one of the most highly respected scientists when it comes to evolutionary biology today. And yet, Richard Dawkins, looking at that exact same science, concludes that there can't be a God, that evidence points to life being an absurdity. There is no meaning to life. It's all random chance. Richard Dawkins, based on the same evidence that Collins is looking at, has become an ardent atheist. How can that be? How can these two brilliant men looking at the same evidence come up with completely opposite conclusions about God? And if Christianity is true, if there really is a God, if the God of Jesus Christ exists, shouldn't it become self-evident to anybody who takes an honest look at the evidence that he's real? Isn't this a challenge, a fundamental challenge to the truth of Christian faith? Blaise Pascal was a leading scientist of his day, one of the most brilliant people to ever walk the face of the earth. Blaise Pascal is responsible for discoveries, inventions that have led to everything from modern statistics, how people conduct and do modern statistics, to the vacuum. And some of those discoveries about the vacuum actually led to or enabled some of the discoveries about quantum theory, quantum mechanics in our day over the last century or two. So Blaise Pascal was a genius. But at the age of 31, he converted to Christianity. He became Christian, in large part because the evidence was so compelling. The evidence, much of the scientific evidence he was looking at, as well as other things, compelled him to believe that Jesus is God incarnate. Pascal is best known in his theological writings for something called Pascal's wager. It's kind of like a bet, how to hedge your bets in life. The best bet in life is to believe in God. He kind of had this elaborate bet and the possibilities, using statistics, the possibilities of what the best outcome is and why you should believe in God, hedge your bets and put your trust in God. But Pascal's wager is kind of trite. People often look at it, it's kind of a silly thing. It doesn't prove God exists. It's just kind of a silly little thing to kind of toy with. Pascal's writings about theology, though, were much more profound. One of the most profound things he talked about was this question of why some people looking at the same evidence believe and others don't. As a scientist, a leading scientist of his day, he was in the perfect position, he is in the perfect position, to comment about this. And this is what Pascal said. This is how he answers this question. He says that God makes himself obscure enough, hidden enough, that anybody who really doesn't want God to exist, doesn't want the God of Jesus Christ to be real, to be true, doesn't desire Jesus, doesn't want a relationship with him, doesn't want him to be Lord of their lives, doesn't want God, anybody, to be Lord of their lives other than themselves. That anybody who feels that way, who in their heart of hearts doesn't want there to be a God, there is enough obscurity, enough hiddenness that God leaves about himself, enough ambiguity, that they can find legitimate intellectual doubts about his existence. They can, with integrity, look at the evidence and doubt that he exists, or conclude that he can't exist. On the other hand, Pascal said, anybody who wants God to exist, who truly desires the God of Jesus Christ to be real, for anybody who is seeking that God will reveal himself to them. God will show them in all the indications he's left in creation and in Revelation, that God will show them that he's real and that Christ will reveal himself to them. What I want to ask Pascal, though, about that, it's a genius answer. It's a great answer to why some people believe and others don't, looking at the same evidence. What I want to ask Pascal is, why did God set it up that way then? Why would God do that? Why would God make himself so hidden, so obscure, so ambiguous that some people could find intellectual doubts that he doesn't exist? Why wouldn't God want to reveal himself to everybody? Well, I'd love to hear what Pascal would say to that, but I think I know what he would say to that. Because as I've thought about that question, as I've wrestled with it, the answer becomes pretty obvious. The reason God doesn't reveal himself so clearly that everybody taking an honest look at the evidence would have to conclude that he exists is because that would compel people to believe in him. It would force them to believe in him. Think about it. If God was so overwhelmingly clear that God existed, who could reject him? Who could say no to him? Out of sheer terror, dread, we would say yes, just for sheer self-preservation. I mean, you wouldn't reject a God you know is real, is true. Or if it's not just for self-preservation, out of self-interest, like if you knew there's really a God, then he could give you your field of dreams. He could give you whatever it is you want most. He could make happen. It's kind of like a magic genie. I mean, out of self-interest, if we knew, if it was so overwhelmingly clear that God existed, we would be drawn to him, but not out of love. We'd be drawn to him out of fear and terror, or because we'd want something from him. We want some kind of quid pro quo from him. That's why God remains hidden enough that he only reveals himself to the people who truly want him, who truly desire him. That preserves our freedom, our free will. And if Christianity is true, then that's exactly what we'd expect to happen. That's perfectly consistent with the Christian worldview, which says that God created us for relationship with him. That's the whole point of creation. And he wants us to respond to his love freely, because the only kind of love that is real, that's genuine, is a freely chosen love. So the way things work, with some people looking at the same evidence making different conclusions about God, that's perfectly consistent with a Christian worldview. It doesn't necessarily prove the Christian worldview is true, but it's exactly what we'd expect to find if it were true. It's perfectly consistent with the way that Christianity says the universe works, the way God works, the God of Jesus Christ works. But I'd add one other thing to that. It's not just that God reveals himself to people who want the God of Jesus Christ to be true, because that could turn into wishful thinking. You get what you really want most, and you can kind of make up in your mind, in your head, what it is that you want most. You can create an imaginary friend if you want. What I would add to that is that God reveals himself not just to people who want this God to be true, who find this God to be good, really good news that this God exists, and doesn't reveal himself to people who believe it's bad news. So it's kind of like the bifurcation, the dichotomy of those who want him to be true, get him, and those who don't, who think it's bad news, don't get him. I would add that there's kind of a middle ground. There's people who are sincerely seeking, desiring the truth, wherever that is, are willing to go wherever the evidence leads, and that God will reveal himself to those people too. That was my experience when I was in college and I first asked these ultimate questions of existence, like, what's the meaning of life? What happens when you die? Is there a God? And if so, who is that God? When I was asking those questions, I was willing to go wherever the evidence led. I just wanted to know the truth, and I was willing to stake my life on wherever that truth was, or whatever that truth was. So if it was atheism, I would become an atheist. If it was Taoism, which was the religion I was really rooting for at the time when I studied the different religions, if it was Taoism, I'd become a Taoist. At the time, I really didn't want Christianity to be true. I had some real issues with the logic of Christianity. I found the logic of Christianity incoherent at the time. So I didn't want Christianity to be true. But as I pursued the truth, as I pursued some of those gnawing questions that kept coming up, eventually I found that it was overwhelmingly clear that Jesus was God. He revealed, I believe, he revealed himself to me. He made it self-evident that that's where the evidence points. So I would argue that God reveals himself to people who are seeking truth, who are willing to go wherever the evidence leads. As long as you don't, before starting out, close your mind to the idea of God. As long as you don't not want God, as long as you don't think it's bad news that God would exist, that he will reveal himself to you if you're seeking truth. And I don't think I'm alone. In fact, I know a lot of other people who have similar stories, and I've read a lot of other people. One of the people that I've read about most recently, fascinating story, is a guy named Paul Williams, who, even though he grew up Anglican, he's from the UK, even though he grew up Anglican, nominally Anglican, by his young adult years, he had checked out of the faith. He found the Christianity he knew back then ludicrous. So he was gravitating toward Eastern philosophy and eventually became a Buddhist, and eventually pursued Buddhism so passionately that he became a world-renowned scholar of Buddhism and is a professor in Buddhist thought. But there were these nagging questions he had about Buddhism and about its incoherence. There were some things that he found completely incoherent about it as he pursued his studies of Buddhism. So after about 20 years of being Buddhist and being a Buddhist professor, at great risk to himself, risk to his career, to some of the relationships he had, to family relationships, he pursued those questions, and not wanting Christianity to be true, not even thinking initially of Christianity, but just asking those difficult questions. And ultimately, they led him to Christ. Ultimately, as he describes in this book, he believes that Jesus revealed himself to him as he honestly pursued those questions. So what I would argue is that anybody who is sincerely seeking the truth, as long as you haven't closed your mind, as long as you don't desire that there not be a God, that Jesus will reveal himself to you. So what do you think about this question? Does this question provide a challenge, an insurmountable challenge to faith in God? Does it mean that God can't exist because people can make such radically different conclusions based on the same evidence? Or do you think that Christianity is consistent with this reality, with people like Francis Collins and Richard Dawkins making different conclusions based on the same evidence they look at? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can go to the Contact EJ page of the Raising Jesus website and leave them there. Also, if you have any other questions or feedback that you want to leave, you can go to the same place and leave that there. I look forward to hearing from you.